The Lost Lands from 2025, directed by Paul W.S. Anderson, who of course directed Resident Evil movies among others. And this is actually based off a short story from Game of Thrones' George R.R. Martin and stars Milla Jovovich and Dave Bautista. And this movie is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi movie, but it kind of plays a little bit like a fantasy movie. If you've seen the Shannara Chronicles, it's kind of like that, a futuristic post-apocalyptic world, but with kind of magic and supernatural creatures and stuff in there as well. So, what's the story? So the story, as I say, is a futuristic dystopian world, and there's only kind of one city left where humans now exist, and they are ruled by the Overlord. And we don't know too much about this kind of society, but he appears to be like a dictator-like ruler, but he's quite ill. And he's got his wife, the Queen, who is more or less kind of running in his stead. You've also got a kind of authoritarian-style church running side by side, who are somewhat at odds with the kind of the ruler, vying for position, so to speak. And they are almost like a kind of Dark Ages style style church, where they kind of want to burn anyone who's a heretic. And Milla Jovovich's character is actually a witch who has some type of powers, and she, you know, is obviously the enemy of the church, but she's actually sent on a mission by the Queen in secret to find a method for her to become a werewolf. Yeah, I know this sounds a little silly. So there is a werewolf that is living kind of out in the wilderness that she's basically got to kind of go and find. And she hires a kind of gunslinger guide in the form of Dave Bautista's character. So the pair of them traverse this landscape, defending themselves from demons and the pursuit of this church who want to pursue Milla Jovovich's character. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. The book that it's based on was meant to be a series of short stories that would form a cohesive sort of story, but he never finished more than the first story. If you know the where the books of Game of Thrones are based on, that's kind of might not surprise you. So there was no other stories as of yet, and there probably never will be, outside of the one book which this is based on. So the movie itself had a somewhat troubled production, various kind of stops and starts. You can kind of tell if you look at Dave Bautista as he is now in 2025 compared to what he looks like here. You can see this movie has been a while in development. But it has some pedigree behind it. Obviously, Bautista and Milla Jovovich are quite popular action sort of stars. Paul W.S. Anderson, who's married to Milla Jovovich, you know, has made some kind of entertaining movies. And obviously, Martin is a popular author. So there is some pedigree here. So let's talk about what works in this movie's favour. Now, if you like, I could say like a video game sort of style movie, a little bit of a kind of a wild ride, lots kind of going on, then I think this movie packs a lot of punch. I would have actually called this movie Guns and Curses. I thought that would have been a fun name, because it has lots of elements, including kind of like westerns, like Mad Max kind of style post-apocalyptic adventures, a bit of romance, as I say, lots of kind of sword and sorcery and fantasy elements. So there's kind of a load going on. So there's so much in this movie. It is to its detriment as well, which we'll talk about. But you certainly, I think, will be looking at thinking, wow, there's a lot of moving pieces here. There's a lot to this world. There's many different facets that we kind of really only get a glimpse of, but as such, it's a constantly kind of moving picture, sort of somewhat kind of fast-paced with the kind of, you know, you're never sort of staying on one sort of thing for too long before you're on to the kind of the next situation. The movie's kind of visual stylings are kind of like a green screeny sort of style effect. Think like the movie Zack Snyder's 300 is the best kind of comparison I would give in its visual sort of stylings, to a degree, like the kind of the Sin City. But I also say like the Riddick movies to a degree as well. They kind of remind me a little bit of that. But that kind of like stylistic vision that we got from 300 and the like, I think is quite apt for this movie. So it's certainly a visually interesting movie with some stylistic kind of camera work, action sequences, stunts and things like this, explosive kind of sequences involving, you know, this kind of like decked out train and things like this. There's some interesting ideas here about how this now sort of fantasy world has derived from our world, for example, where there's one sequence where our couple, our protagonists, are atop this area which looks to be some type of nuclear reactor, and Bautista warns of demons, and we learn that these were once humans that have been stayed in this area and tried to achieve the, you know, tried to retrieve the treasure from this area. Obviously, the nuclear element beneath their feet, and has turned them into demons. So they're not actually demonic; they are as the result of you know, some type of nuclear reaction and things like this, and radiation poisoning that has turned them into these kind of monstrous demon type creatures. But there are also clearly supernatural things, because we do have a werewolf. Milla Jovovich's character does have powers, so not everything is kind of sort of really explained, but there's some interesting ideas, at least, how, you know, this world is changed from this kind of post-apocalyptic now sort of landscape into how it's evolved into various sort of fantasy ideas. Like we have our religious order kind of act a little bit like crusaders in a way. They're kind of wearing that, you know, the cross, a little bit like the kind of the crusaders and things like this. So I think there's lots of elements here that are kind of chucked in this movie. It's a little bit of a jumble, but it's certainly, I would say, an entertaining movie. I have to say, I mean, there's a reason why the Resident Evil movies and a lot of kind of Milla Jovovich's other kind of action movies have had an audience, have had some sort of level of success, and why she is quite successful as an action heroine, because she's quite watchable, quite a kind of like a visually interesting and quite a fun actress. I mean, she might not be the kind of like the greatest actress in regards to, you know, levels of realistic performance, but she certainly has her fans, and she certainly has charisma, as has Dave Bautista. So I think these two make for an interesting couple, and, you know, quite a fun couple of characters. Let's transition to what doesn't work, because I think this movie is the promise of what could have been rather than what it's actually delivered. So let's just stay on Jovovich and Bautista for a while. Although I think the actors' charisma does shine through and makes them watchable, you feel their characters are, you only get the barest, like, surface level of what these characters actually are like. And I think the movie it's to its detriment that these characters seem so sort of superficial in many ways, and we never really feel like you get to know these sort of these characters and the world essentially that these characters are living in as well. Now I think you maybe this has got so much going on into potential world building. I understand that you might not be able to enunciate every kind of like nuance that this kind of world has. because there's a lot I feel this movie just kind of skips over. You just got to accept it. But I do think the characters here were the real missed opportunity, because you don't feel like you get to know them. But and as I say, I mean, the world seems somewhat contradictory. They try to kind of explain, for example, the demons in it, and they sort of relate it back to, you know, sort of science fiction ideas that they've been changed by radiation. But, you know, a werewolf, there just is a werewolf, and Milla Jovovich's powers are magic, or is it some type of sort of psychic situation? Again, it's just the barest of minimums here. And then we have this kind of people in power, the Overlord and his kind of army, more or less run by the Queen, and then the Church, who are at odds with one another. It just seems a lot going on, and for this movie, it kind of having two warring factions, both of which are kind of antagonistic, and they're subjugating all the kind of the populace, all the sort of people who seem to be, you know, slaves, and they look at kind of Milla Jovovich as some type of folk hero. And again, it's just the barest of kind of like details are really given. It's just going to skip through it. And then, you know, without spoiling anything, but in the same sort of breadth, I would say the ending here. Now, I'm not going to spoil it for you, clearly. But to me, it doesn't really make sense, particularly when you consider Dave Bautista's character and his thoughts about what he's doing there. There's a kind of a twist here that I thought, you know, I don't really like that. To me, it's just like, well, you know, I think Bautista's character would have acted a little differently once you know the twist. You know, so there's that. The visual stylings feel a lot of green screen here. It's a very artificial feel. I understand that they were practical sets built for this movie, but certainly the world around it, very kind of fake feeling. I mean, you could argue it's a stylistic choice, but it's just, it never really feels like anyone is there. A lot of the kind of like the situations feel overly kind of CGI. The werewolf, which is the big showdown, is I mean, the Van Helsing movie with Hugh Jackman's looking at this thinking, damn, that makes our werewolf look good. But that's not the only kind of overly kind of CGI sort of situation. The action sequences are fun and over the top, but they never really feel like earned action sequences. That they feel like special effects spectacles and things like this. So clearly, as I've said, this movie has been in development for a very long time. A number of issues. I think this movie was probably made to be like a bigger movie than it probably has turned out to be, but it's ended up being somewhat shortchanged, and I would imagine probably the post-production here is where they've tried to kind of cut the budget, and that is why some of the VFX, I mean, this is my speculation, but I think that's probably why some of the VFX here look very kind of, you know, the CGI just isn't particularly strong, because, you know, they've looked at this and think, this is not going to run well, let's not spend a lot more money on it. It's had a lot of production value, you know, a lot of production problems and things like this. Let's cut our losses and not spend too much on post-production. And as such, it's a messy movie. It does have entertainment value. If you like a kind of like a pizza with loads of toppings just bunged on it, but that don't necessarily always kind of go together, and you're kind of like, oh, this is like pure junk food, and you like it for some, but you'll be, I don't know if I can eat all that. So that's my analogy for this movie. I'd say a 5 out of 10. It's a visual spectacle, but it's a messy movie, and I think unsatisfying ultimately. 5 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to you next time. Bye for now.